How did Theoden's son die? What battle took place there? What forces did Rohan face at the start of the War of the Ring? Friends, let's find out. Grima poisoned the thinking of Theoden, portraying the actions of Eomer as wanting to increase his own authority, independently of the king. These whispers found purchase in the fragile mind of Theoden. Theodred, Theoden's only son, and his sister's son Eomer, however, remained loyal. Saruman wanted to kill Theodred to help weaken the kingdom of Rohan, and so sent a great host to do this. At the fords of the Isen, the river was broad and shallow. Only at this place, south of Isengard, could large forces, such as men in armour or on horseback, cross. So here Saruman would attack, where his forces could be reinforced and have a constant supply line, whilst Rohan would have to call aid and wait for food or starve. The scouts of Theodred had warned him there were troops being mustered at Isengard, but the forces of Orthanc were already on the march. He met a vanguard north of the fjords, and Theodred scattered it, not losing anyone. Then, boldened by this, he rode on to meet the main force. But they were ready. The enemy was in position. Trenches had been dug, manned by pikemen. Theodred was brought to a standstill and almost surrounded, but he escaped with the help from additional companies that had crossed with him. So his own forces retreated, but were slowed down when the orcs from Isengard attacked the rear guards under Grimbold, who had to fight them off before he could continue the retreat. Reaching the fords, Theodred reinforced the west bank. The others he sent across the river, save his own company, who would be on foot on the island to cover Grimbold's retreat if it came to that. The eastern force of Saruman came, made of men from Dunlending and orc wolf riders. The wolves caused fear amongst the horses of Rohan. The Dunlendings and wolf riders took the horse herd and any picketed horses. The east bank garrison was taken by the Uruk, and the riders coming from the west that had just crossed. They fought, but were driven from the fjord. With the eastern end captured, Orc-men, ferocious, mail-clad and armed with axes, attacked those on the island. Grimbold on the west bank was also engaged with Saruman's forces on that side, and hearing the clash of arms he looked and saw the orcs with axes driving Theodred from the shores of the island towards its centre. Grimbold withdrew back across the river. His forces had suffered many losses, but given worse to the orcs, and he held the east bank with steep slopes in front of him. The enemy chose not to engage. Elfhelm, answering Theodred's call for forces to join him, was leading 4 companies. His scouts saw wolf riders, and as the sun sunk low, he joined the battle. They charged with Elf at their head. Few stood to meet them. Elf sent companies to pursue, and the rest guarded the east bank. He went to the island. The axemen were caught between the defenders of the island and Elfhelm's newly arrived forces, and were slain to a man. Elfhelm himself, however, sprang up towards the knoll, and there he found Grimbold fighting 2 great axemen for possession of Theodred's body. One Elfhelm at once slew, and the other fell before Grimbold. There Theodred spoke his last words. "Let me lie here to keep the fords till Eomer come." Night came and the enemy faded. Rohan had held both banks, but lost the king's son and many horses. With Theodred dead, Erkenbrand of the Westfold, an area to the east of the Gap of Rohan and containing Helm's Deep, was given command of the Westmark. He sent riders to give Theoden his son's last words and asked for Eomer's help. Grima received the message and used the curtness of this advice to further his policy of delay. After Gandalf threw out Grima, Eomer and the king set out, but by then another battle of the fords had begun. Erkenbrand did not know what losses the men of Rohan had suffered yet, and so did not know the forces he could muster to help them. He gave orders to Grimbold, whilst he saw to that, to go and help. Grimbold would be in the field with Elfhelm, who had been mustered from Edoras, and so they would both command, but they were friends, and so this brought no dissension. Elf saw no reason to hold the fords when Saruman could move around them, whilst Grimbold, as was tradition, wanted to hold them. So it was. Grimbold, using the earth forts in guarding the approaches, held a very defensible position. The island was left bare. Elfhelm withdrew and placed soldiers ready to meet any attack from the east of the fords. Saruman's forces came down from Isengard to attack the forts on the west side of the fords. Rohan resisted them, and when both forts were very engaged, Uruks forced passage between them and moved across the fords, and a battalion that had been held back was thrown into the fight, and broke the forts. Grimbold gathered a few men and, attacking from the rear, clove through the orcs until he reached Theodred, and as he did, Theoden's son fell, hewed down by a great orcman. Grimbold slew him and stood over the body of the king's son. Elfhelm moved towards Grimbold's camp, setting his men to screen those forces from attack from east or north. Messages had been sent to Erkenbrand. Knowing the forces they still faced, Rohan's soldiers gained a little rest and waited for dawn to try and delay the enemy. All Saruman's remaining forces came, and they swept over the fords like a river of fire, with a great clamour of hate. Grimbold could not hold the east bank, and formed a shield wall around the camp. It was surrounded, and the forces from Isengard threw torches over the shield wall to terrify the horses and cause chaos. The wall held. The Dunlending forces were thrown in, but they were less well armed, and the wall held. Grimbold, in that moment, surrounded and harassed, realised the wisdom of Elfhelm, that his men would fight on to the last, but this would give no help to Erkenbrand. Those who went south would be of value. And so the shield wall was opened on the east side, and riders who had horses sent out, driving back Isengard's orcs, and then they turned and charged the enemy to the north and the south. The enemy thought at first that a large force of riders had come from the east. Grimbold on foot had a rear guard of his strongest men, and covered whilst the rest retreated. Seeing the enemy fleeing, Saruman's commander saw their tactic, but held his forces at the fords. They had been taken, and then they would take the road south. As they retreated, the men of Rohan encountered no enemy, and perhaps thought they held Isengard at the fords, but a large force had already gone past them, and Elfhelm was in their way. They tried to surround his small group of riders. He gathered all he could into a close body of horsemen, and went east, knowing he could not reach Grimbold. Later, Gandalf appeared, and gave orders that Elfhelm ride to Edoras. Grimbold was sent to Erkenbrand, who was going to the Hornburg to help lift the siege. Seeing the great forces arrayed against him, King Theoden, awakened by Gandalf, and free of Grima and the influence of Sauron, would leave Edoras, and break the forces of Sauron against the walls of the Hornburg in Helm's Deep. And then the horn of Helm Hammerhand would be sounded, and Theoden with Aragorn would ride out to meet them. And Saruman's army would then be attacked on the flank by fresh riders, finally gathered by Erkenbrand and found by Gandalf, and they would break Saruman's forces between them, achieving a victory at a heavy price for the people of Rohan. What do you think to the death of Theodred and the Battle of the Fords? Could Rohan have done more? Should Grimbold have realised sooner the wiseness of Elfhelm? Comment down below.